Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second part of the Prague Populism Conference. We are now starting the academic part of our event, and it's my great pleasure to welcome at our conference Nonna Mayer from Sciences Po in Paris. She's an academic, political scientist and researcher in political science, and she's a research director at the CNRS and a specialist of electoral sociology and far-right movements in France. She was president of the Association Française des Sciences Politiques from 2005 to 2016, and she's published numerous works on electoral politics. And she also co-directed a large group that studied the National Front, which is very important topic in current studies of populism. And she focuses on electoral sociology, in particular of the National Front and the French far right. And she also studies associated activism, racism, and anti-Semitism. And today she will discuss with us why the pandemic does not necessarily boost support for populist radical right on the case of France. So Nonna, please, thank you again for being with us today, and please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me for this conference. It's a great pleasure and it's a great honor. My only regret is that I'm not with you in Prague, but just sitting in the living room in Paris. So it's an important and sensitive issue. What is COVID-19 doing to support for the populist radical rights? And the answer is really not simple. So I won't give you many answers. I'll try to deconstruct the problem mostly. Why? Because it is a very complex. So I'll try first to open my PowerPoint so we see things a little better. And now I would just like to put it on. So, diaporama. Here we go. Do you see? Okay. There we go. So the answer is not simple because it's a very complicated phenomenon. There is the disease, but there's also the measures to prevent it. There's the social and economic effect. So what exactly are we referring to when we speak of the impact of the pandemic? Two, it changes all the time. We have already had the third wave, maybe the fourth is coming. It's country specific. There are many different types of populist rights, also strong, weak, in office and opposition with different strategies. And of course, COVID is only one factor among so many others on the support for the populist radical right. So I'll focus my presentation on populist radical rights using Kasmude's definition. That means that these rights are populist. They oppose the pure people to the corrupt elite. But what qualifies them is that they are nativists, us versus them, the non-native, perceived as a threat, and they are authoritarian in favor of law, order, hierarchy. And I'll do two things. I'll concentrate on Western Europe, which I know better, and on the case of France, which I know even better, and the French Rassemblement National, national rally. And the first part will be a quick panorama of existing research and surveys on COVID-19 effects on these right-wing populist parties, summing up the research. And then I'll focus on the French case with Marine Le Pen and her party, one of the oldest and most successful of these parties in Europe. So first, the panorama of COVID effects. There is quite a debate. Some people consider it should be mostly positive because the pandemic increases fear, economic insecurity, resentment against the government, against the political elites, because it favors conspiracy theories, anti-foreigners feeling, the usual ingredients of success of these parties. So the impact should be positive. Others say no, it could turn against them if they do not appear credible, if they don't appear to have the capacity to manage the crisis effectively, and there would be a rally around the flag effect for the governments in office. So I'll use three researchers which help us have a little idea of the impact of COVID. The first one is a report for the Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung, The Profiteers of Fear. And it studies Germany, Finland, France, Greece, Italy, Sweden, and Spain from March to August 2020, at the very beginning of the pandemic. And what they do is something finally very simple. They just look at the voting intentions, the polls in March, and then how they change till August, just to look at the evolution. It's very simple. And you see in the dark red, it's early March, then the pink is early August 2020. You see that in quasi all the countries, support in the polls for these right-wing populist parties tends to go down. The only exception is Italy, where you see that for Forza Italia, the voting intentions don't move. And then you have Fratelli d'Italia, where they go slightly up. But the result seems to show that there's quasi no impact of COVID on support in the polls for these parties. Now, the second work goes a little further. It's Jakub Vondres and Cas Moede, victims of the pandemic, European far-right parties at COVID-19. It's an interesting study because they go into detail of the diversity of these populist rights, showing that they have very different reactions to COVID. The only thing they have in common is that they frame it in the anti-immigrant stance and anti-Europe, plus conspiracy views. But what do they tell us? They work on the 27 European countries and on 31 populist rights for the same period, March to June 2020. And they make the polling averages. But they make a distinction between these populist rights in government, in Hungary and Poland, there are two. You see that the difference is very weak, plus 0.5 percentage points of increase in the voting intentions, a very small rally around the flag effect. Those that are in coalition governments, there is rather a decline, minus 0.3. And those who are in opposition, the majority, an even greater decline. But all that tends to show that COVID, at least in these 4 months in the beginning, doesn't really make a difference. So that's the result. The third survey goes further. It's Gilli Valdi and Oscar Mazzoleni, and they made a more detailed survey in France, Germany, Italy, Switzerland, and also the US with the same question. It's survey data, and they do regressions. They control for the impact of other factors, socio-economic, attitudinal factors. So it goes a little further than just the mere comparison at the aggregate level. And what do they show us? That there's no mechanical impact of the pandemic on support for these rights, whatever the indicator, popularity or voting probability. That the impact is mediated by the degree of economic insecurity felt by the people interviewed. And it's of course higher in the countries most hit. And there's an increase in the probability to vote for these parties according to the degree of economic insecurity controlled by age, gender, education, anti-immigrant sentiment. But there again, even after controlling for that, there's no really strong effect, except in Italy, where Fratelli d'Italia and the Lega, and a little effect for AfD in East Germany. And what's interesting, but we won't develop it here, but just to show you there's never a mechanical effect, you must contextualize the impact of COVID. In the US, you have a reverse effect. The most worried turned against the populist Trump, especially moderate conservatives. So that they made a nice scale of felt economic insecurity by country. And it goes from 1 to 7. They have the half points there. So you see that in France and in Italy and in the US, you have a high proportion who have a very high feeling of economic insecurity in the countries that have been most hit at the time by the pandemic. And if you do a regression analysis controlling, as I said, for sociodemographic and attitudinal variables, you see that there's one country where really things happen. It's Italy. You have a clear, all things equal, effect of the COVID on support for the Lega and even more Fratelli d'Italia. And in the US, it's the opposite thing. So I'll leave it there to concentrate on what I know better, the French case, father and daughter, Marine Le Pen, who took over in 2011. Just for those who don't know in detail, the electoral success story of the yesterday National Front, today National Rally. These bars there show you the results in different types of election. The first series of bars, it's the presidential election. That's where Marine Le Pen got a record score of almost 34% of the valid votes in the second round of the last presidential election, almost 11 million voters. But you see that the three last groups of bars, they are the regional elections, European elections, departmental elections. Since she is at the head of the party, she has made excellent scores, far better than her father's, coming first in the two last European elections of all the French parties. So that gives you an idea. But meanwhile, when you have parliamentary elections, which is the second block, you see that there is no takeoff there. So that gives you at the same time the electoral success story and the limitations of that party. For the moment, in spite of all these votes, they have 8 deputies in the National Assembly and 1 senator. What I'd like to show you is that in France, COVID brought no marked change in support and audience of the rally, national rally. You see mainly continuation of previous trends that started after the last presidential election. 2 other issues are far more decisive than COVID, immigration, and also even more these days, security. But in the long run, COVID is feeding political distrust and disaffection, democratic fatigue, and making the political game more and more uncertain. So that's what I'm going to try and see with you in the time left. First, I'd like to show the assets of Marine Le Pen. There's the impact of her de-demonization strategy launched in 2011 to normalize the party, and we have wonderful data with an annual barometer on the image of the party since 1984. And clearly you see she shows a softer, better image than the father. That's the perception of the danger for democracy represented by her party. In red, yes, it's a danger. In blue, no, it's not a danger. You see the father sometimes up to 3/4 of the respondents considers him as a danger for democracy. Marine Le Pen today is at 49%. And people who think she and her party are not a danger, up to 42%. But if you look closer, you see that it didn't come with the COVID, the last percentage. It started after the 2017, slowly going up, people who say it's not a danger, from 36 to 42. To the idea that her party one day could come to power. There again, you see that there's a definite trend. Yes, 56, 55%, but the change is not between February 2020 and today. It starts before. All these things are long-term trends. It's not the COVID effect. The same goes with her handicaps, lack of competence, of credibility. She's not seen as somebody capable to govern. There are many questions asked about her. She's a willful, she can take decisions, she understands the problems, the everyday problems, she's capable to rally beyond her camp, she has ideas, she's sympathetic, warm, honest, that's all the things. You see, there's no great changes in the last years. There's one thing which is very clear, the pink curve at the bottom, only 24% this April consider she would make a good president of the Republic. And this has slightly gone up since 2017, but hardly. So there again, COVID doesn't disrupt completely long-term trends. The same goes for a party only 1/3, 33%, consider that it is a government party and not just an opposition party. And there again, nothing really changed with COVID. And when they are asked if, for several people, if there would be a better president than Macron, April 2021, well, only 29% believe so. It's better than Mélenchon, the extreme left, and Xavier Bertrand, the conservative right, but it's really not a majority of people. Most of them think it would be worse if Marine Le Pen was in office. And the second big handicap is her political isolation. This party is still seen as an anti-system party. It has a very solid core of voters, very determined, more determined than the other voters, but they have difficulties in going beyond, in enlarging the circle. And people, for instance, strongly oppose the idea of a right-wing coalition integrating the national rally. People think, and it's going up, that it should be, that one should fight the national rally, 28%, that's going up with the COVID. Others say that one should refuse any agreement, even if you don't fight, 23, that makes a majority. And those who think we should make electoral alliances, the percentage is going down from 22 to 19 in 1 year, and treat it as an ally from 10 to 9. So that's the main handicap of the National Front, lack of credibility, political isolation. Now, what about their audience a year before the coming presidential election? What about the ideas, audience, the popularity of the leader, and the voting intentions? That, since 1984, is the global adherence to the ideas of the National Front and the National Rally today. Those who disagree are in red. Those who agree are in blue. Well, there again, 29% today agree with the ideas of Marine Le Pen's party. There were moments in the history where you had almost a third, especially after her 2012 good score in the presidential election. Today, it has been going up since the last presidential election, but not as high as before, 29%. That's the popularity of Marine Le Pen. In green, it's the positive opinions. In red, the bad ones. There again, no takeoff after the COVID. As a matter of fact, Macron, although he is hated by large parts of the electorate, has done better. It's the orange line. COVID, because of the rally around the flag effect, rather made his popularity that had been very, very low go up a bit. Last, voting. People who say that they have never voted and never will for the national rally, they are 63%. It's the upline on top. Those who say they would, they are a clear minority, even today. And we are 1 year before the presidential election, so it doesn't mean much, just an indication about the political balance. We don't even know who are going to be the candidates. But what one sees is that two candidates clearly stand out. Emmanuel Macron, whatever the conservative candidate Xavier Bertrand or Valérie Pécresse, he gets between 25 and 27% of the voting intentions. That means from 2 to 3 points more than in the 2017 presidential election. And the main opponent is Marine Le Pen in purple at the bottom, 26 and 28%, according who is the conservative right candidate. That means she has gained 5 points compared to 2017. So there is an electoral dynamic, not necessarily owing to the COVID, but in the last 5 years. And in the second round, there are many surveys, it's more or less, she gets between 44% and 46% of the votes. Macron comes ahead for the moment, but that means 10 points above her 2017 score. So there is an electoral potential, let's say, for Marine Le Pen. Yet, I would say that other issues have been far more important than COVID. her issues, the issues of Marine Le Pen and her party, it's immigration and Islam, the only ones on which she's considered as credible. But the second one is security, law and order. And that's playing in her favor, and the political context is polarized around these issues, and that helps her. Islam and secularization are at the heart of the political debate, fueled by votes of a law on separatism, proposal to forbid veiled mothers to accompany school trips, hunting Islamo-leftists in the university, asking to stop immigration for a couple of years, a moratoire. All that is good for Marine Le Pen. The second thing, which is maybe even better for her, is a context of violence. We've had terrible terrorist Islamist attacks, the decapitation of a teacher last October. We've had several attacks against the police, a policewoman knifed in Rambouillet in April. And beyond terrorism, youth gangs violence, police shot during their work, as in Avignon in May, a lot of debate around reinforcing security and law and order. And that's very good for Marine Le Pen, because in 2002, her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, to the general surprise, got more votes than the socialist candidate, Lionel Jospin, in the first round. And a careful analysis of the votes shows that it's on the issue of security, which was at the heart of the debate, that he gained a sizable proportion of votes from the conservative rights. And Marine Le Pen is trying to do the same with the conservative right, the electors of Les Républicains. So, of course, when you ask voters what is important for them, what are their motivations when they're going to vote? COVID, health, and purchase power are the problems that they put forward clearly. But security issues have been going up, especially among LR, the conservative right voters. That's a potential for Marine Le Pen. Another point, going beyond just votes, I would say that there is an indirect impact of the pandemic. It fuels, it increases a political disaffection that has started long ago. One sees people are less interested in politics, what they call politician politics, less motivated to vote. They have less trust in the political elites, the party elites, they find them powerful in front of the crisis. So we risk to have in the coming election more abstention. And that means more uncertainty. And that also can help Marine Le Pen. There has been a survey, the survey opinion, it's what we call the trust barometer of the Cevipof in France. It's available online, very useful data. And they made a comparative survey, who is interested in politics? That must have been in February, I think. You see that less than half of the French adult population says they are interested in politics, 79% in Germany, 58% in the United Kingdom, 69% in Italy. And that could breed abstention, a drop in electoral participation. We know for the moment, 60% only say they are sure to vote in the coming presidential election, 77% of the National Rally supporters, 67% of the conservative right supporters, 56% on the left. That differential turnout can also help Marine Le Pen. Conclusion, it's very difficult to evaluate a specific COVID political impact. It's very different from a country to another. It changes in time. It's mediated by ideological and political factors. As for France, there's no major reshuffling of support for Le Pen's party, but in the long run, it's a destabilizing factor. It contributes to the erosion of political engagement and trust, to the unknitting of the living together. And what about 2022? Of course, we are 1 year ahead. It's still totally uncertain. And it's very unlikely, owing to her weaknesses, that Marine Le Pen should win, unless by default. If too many people abstain, if in the second round they refuse to choose between a Macron and a Le Pen, if there are more terrorist attacks, if security, immigration, Islam continue to polarize the electoral and political debate. Last, I haven't time to develop here, there are also non-electoral politics. We've had many violent confrontations in the last year. We've had the Yellow Vests episode. We've had several riots, violent, even in spite of the confinement. We've had, from the part of retired generals, a tribune calling to react against the dismantling of France, the hordes of barbarians that we have in our suburbs. So that is also something one should watch, because politics is not only in the voting stations, it can also be in the street. And I'll stop there to leave more time for the discussion.